Christ candle is lit, a simple but powerful symbol of presence, of seeing things in a different light, being on a path that needs light for us to be able to follow. And as we walk the path of faith together, daily on land that is sacred, a place of gathering and source of food and shelter and spiritual connection for many indigenous peoples of Turtle Island over many thousands of years, we're learning to respect the long history of stewardship and relationship with the land and its creatures that is shared among the Huron-Wendat, the Petun, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. We have a long way to go, but we are working to learn how to live in right relations with them and with this land. So greetings on this warm, sultry, maybe Sunday in August, as Bloor Street and Trinity-St. Paul's and St. Matthew's United Churches gather together for summer worship. It's good to have you here, whether in the sanctuary or on Zoom, as we reflect together and consider in words and music and moments of quiet life in this world of ours, our own lives and the lives of others with whom we're in community. In these days, these Sundays in August, we are experimenting just a bit with how we shape this experience of morning worship, somewhat inspired by the format of podcasts that many of us download and listen to frequently. And our focus on these Sundays is on stories, how we tell stories, and how story can transform us, whether we are telling the story or hearing the story. And then we will take time to talk about the stories that have transformed you and that can transform us all by sharing. You know, I can't tell you how often I hear following a funeral or a memorial or a celebration of life service that someone who knew the deceased for 30 or 40 years discovered in the stories and tributes that they didn't know this or that or any other number of things, as it turns out, about their best friend. This is often followed by saying, I wish we could have these gatherings while people are alive, because then we'd hear what our friends and family really appreciated or depended on us for in life. And the rest of us would learn things about one another that somehow we'd never known. It just never came up. And we'd learn that, well, it could still make a difference to our friendship and to our understanding. And similarly, at closing services for churches, when people seemingly come out of the woodwork and talk about how vital that faith community had been for them at a key point in life, and other people, remaining church members, wonder what might have happened if those people had stuck around and contributed at the time. Stories can build compassion. Stories can deepen our sense of others, bridge polarities, and overcome stuck places that we didn't imagine could be worked through. Stories make room for imagination. Stories make room for mystery in a world of data points and spreadsheets. As Mary Oliver expresses it in her poem, Mysteries, Yes. Truly, we live with mysteries too marvelous to be understood. How grass can be nourishing in the mouths of the lambs. How rivers and stones are forever in allegiance with gravity while we ourselves dream of rising. How two hands touch and the bonds will never be broken. How people come from delight or the scars of damage to the comfort of a poem. Let me keep my distance, always, with those who say, let me keep my distance always from those who think they have the answers. Let me keep company always with those who say, look, and laugh in astonishment and bow their heads. I really am glad you're here on Zoom or in the sanctuary, because what happens here as we are met by God's Spirit in this place, as we tell stories, as we form community together, will be different because you're here, because you are a part of it.
United Church of Canada is gathered in Calgary for General Council, and among the stories we are telling ourselves there, around the theme Visions and Dreams, are stories that give us courage and vision and hope for today, for the future. Let's hear one of those stories. Not a story of what has happened, but a crazy dream story of what our experience and relationship with God tells us might be possible, what could happen in faith. From Isaiah chapter 43, verses 16 to 19. This is what God says, the God who builds a road right through the ocean, who carves a path through pounding waves. He says, forget about what's happened. Don't keep going over old history. Be alert, be present. I'm about to do something brand new. It's bursting out. Don't you see it? There it is. I'm making a road through the desert, rivers in the Badlands. And then, this Sunday in the cycle of readings that links us with churches around the world is a story about faith that reaches back and speaks to the fundamentals. What is faith anyway? It then touches on stories through the history of the Jewish people, stories that told them again and again that their faith was real. Faith is grounded in actual examples of people who came up close against the wonder, life, and love of God. None of those people in their lifetime had certainty, but they left behind stories that spoke for themselves. Our reading is selected verses from Hebrews 11. The fundamental fact of existence is that truth in God, faith, is the firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. It's our handle on what we can't see. The act of faith is what distinguished our ancestors, set them on a path. By faith, we see the world called into existence by God's word, what we see created by what we don't see. By an act of faith, for instance, Abel brought a better sacrifice to God than Cain. It was what he believed, not what he brought, that made the difference. By an act of faith, Enoch skipped death completely. They looked all over and couldn't find him because God had taken him. By faith, Noah built a ship in the middle of dry land. He was warned about something he couldn't see and acted on what he was told. As a result, Noah became intimate with God. And by an act of faith, Abraham said yes to God's call to travel to an unknown place that would become his home. When he left, he had no idea where he was going.
So last Sunday, we began talking about story. And I retold a story about a young boy who put an axe through his knee and discovered that how he told that story in later years would mark whether his physical limitations crippled his life or enabled him to fulfill a larger and different role in life and in the community. How we tell the stories that are the narrative of who we are, that tell us most deeply about our values and beliefs and hopes, and that tell the stories of the groups and the communities that we are a part of, define us. Now, communication and how we tell stories has changed hugely in our society. But people of faith, the followers of Jesus, we've always told stories. Stories that help us to ask and to stay with the questions of our lives. Stories that transform us. In his book, The Truth About Stories, that came up in our conversation last week, Thomas King writes that the truth about stories is that that's all we are. And he goes on then to quote the Nigerian storyteller, Ben Okri, who writes, "In a fractured age, when cynicism is God, here is a possible heresy. We live by stories. We also live in them. One way or another, we are living the stories planted in us early or along the way. We're also living the stories we planted, unknowingly or knowingly, in ourselves. We live the stories that either give our lives meaning or negate it with meaninglessness. If we change the stories we live by, quite possibly we change our lives. So the stories we tell shape how we understand ourselves, how we interact with one another and with the world, and with profound currents in our lives like love and relationships, our hopes, our deepest fears. It's all informed by story and our imagination and the meaning that comes from there. But here's the thing. What happens when the stories stop working? What happens when people stop listening, stop caring? The United Church, that, as Garnet mentioned, is meeting in General Council in Calgary this week, had a very compelling birth narrative. A Canadian church, no longer obsessed with European divisions and the past, but looking to the future with hope in a new land of promise. It was a giddy achievement. And we've celebrated 100 years of that story and how it has remained resilient and courageous. But already, somewhere around 1962, people began to tune out. Slowly at first, and then more quickly. And the response from the United Church of Canada and other churches in our society reminds me a little bit of God speaking to the Jewish prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and so on, about how the people have turned away from God, causing anguish and breaking the heart of God. After all I've done for you, my people, now you turn away. For churches in our society over the past 60 years, there's been a lot going on that has brought about a turning away. And we needn't go into all of that again. But it has brought us to a point today where, among other things, the reality is that people, all of us, are inundated with stories, with narratives, with stories of success and fulfillment and happiness. It's difficult to get people to pay attention to what it is you're trying to tell them because they're flooded with stories from brand advertisements, and social media, and live streaming, and so on. It's a fire hose of information clamoring each piece of it for our attention. How do we break through? We know we've got something to say. As faith communities, we certainly have something to say, but people have more important things to do. I'll get to your story in just a little bit, they say, or I've heard it all before. Honestly, I can't take another story about spirituality or purpose or that fundraiser you're running. They've got 10 other things competing for attention right now. So what do we do to tell our story, to be heard, to capture eyes and ears? For some, it lies in technique. After all, marketing is the science of capturing our attention. As Terry O'Reilly makes clear on his CBC radio shows and podcasts like The Age of Persuasion and Under the Influence, as he says, while Volvo makes and sells cars, what they're really in is the business of safety. And while Molson's sells beer, what they're really in the business of, what they really sell, are fun times with friends and family, and so on. What are we in the business of, really, as United Churches in Toronto, a quarter of the way through the 21st century? Steve Jobs said, you've got to start with the customer experience and work backward to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And then he said, as we have tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers and figure out some awesome technology that we can develop and then ask, how are we going to market that? So it's about more than just getting better at telling gripping stories. In a fascinating book on the role of story in business and marketing called Meaningful, the story of ideas that fly, Bernadette Jiwa writes that if you want to get beyond the fleeting attention of clickbait, the best way to get attention, she says, is to give it unconditionally first. To really understand the worldview of your customers and colleagues, you need to start whispering, I see you, instead of yelling, look at me. Whispering, I see you, rather than yelling, look at me. Daniel Pink, the author of books about creativity and motivation, writes in his 2006 book, A Whole New Mind, that the future belongs to a very different kind of mind. Creators and empathizers, pattern recognizers, and meaning makers. A close friend of mine, an architect, began with people's stories, not with budgets and blueprints and square footage. He maintained that he had to care about the people he was building and designing for, to understand their dreams and desires and priorities in life before he could begin to design a space in which they would then live. A partner at IDEO, the global design and innovation company, one of whose early successes was developing and designing the computer mouse for Apple, put it very simply. You're a better designer if you love the people you're designing for. Love. Love. People won't pay attention or engage just because someone says they should. They need a story that connects them meaningfully to what we are about. They need to know we are listening to them. And the stories we tell give them an accurate read of whether that's true. Are we really listening to them? Steve Jobs said that the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. He didn't say that because he loved reading bedtime stories to his kids. He said it because stories create change. It's why we've been telling them to each other for generations, to promote and motivate and protect our tribes, to pass down deep learning and wisdom, to connect and warn each other, to spread love, or, as we're seeing today, to spread hate, and suspicion. In any case, without stories, we are rudderless. Having a story-driven, or if you like, mission-driven strategy enables us to be resilient, to adapt in times of rapid change and disruption, because we understand that our story is bigger than the scene that's being played out before us right at the moment. But to do that effectively, we need to know the people we want to connect with. The communities around Bloor and Huron, Bloor and Spadina, St. Clair and Christie. Know them deeply enough to tell stories from out of the reality they live. Why did we not hear anything about Jesus until he was about 30 years old or so? I have my own theory, and it's that it's because he was listening. He was listening closely to the people around him. His stories then spoke to people as if they were being told from out of the very center of their lives. He spent 30 years listening. Their deepest hopes, their fears, their concerns, he got them before he tried to tell them anything. The Franciscan contemplative and author that many of you are familiar with, I think, Richard Rohr, puts it this way. Suppose a couple of PhDs that sit at your dinner table every evening, dispensing information about nuclear physics and cyberspace, string theory and climate change, answering every question you can imagine and a few you've never imagined. They don't lead you through their thinking processes or involve you, they simply state the facts. We might find their conclusions interesting and even helpful, but the way they relate to us won't set us free, won't empower us, or make us feel good about ourselves. It doesn't invite growth and life. It leaves us dependent, passive. This is not the path to wisdom. And so it is that Jesus takes his disciples with him, and watching him, they learn the cycle and the rhythm of his life. As he moves from prayer and solitude to teaching and service in community, he introduces them to a lifestyle living with him. And he invites us to do the same. And eventually, even the crowds got to know him. They'd figure out where he was going and they'd go after him. He made them welcome. He talked to them about God's love and he cured those in need of healing. The disciples next to him watched, noticing how he did things, how he talks to people, how he waits, how he listens, how he's patient, how he depends on God and takes time for prayer, how he doesn't respond cynically or critically to their questions. What we find in the stories of Jesus are the skills of a gifted storyteller who reached his listeners through colorful vignettes, cryptic symbols, curious riddles, and circular plots that engaged listeners as participants in the process of making the story whole. There's no need for Jesus to stand like me behind a podium or a pulpit. He interacted with his listeners' hearts and minds in a way that was integral to the story itself. Ultimately, the only way the story could be made whole and would make wounded listeners whole was by engaging them with deep participation in the story. For us in particular today, to tell our story, it means that we have to cross over and build real connection with people who are different from us. If we're afraid of a different culture or religion, or if a group of people scare us somehow, then we have to get to know them, to learn to see the world as they do. We must move into life itself, loving our enemies. And so it is, as we read in Matthew at one point, all Jesus did that day was tell stories, a long storytelling afternoon. God loves the traveler, the foreigner, the exile, and those people are and always have been storytellers, seekers of meaning and narrative thread that give shape to things from within, because life doesn't naturally give us that clear shape from outside. I love those who embrace in-betweenness, because they can serve as a vital living metaphor for the life of faith, contemporary parables for what we need to be about today in the in-between places that we find ourselves. I love those who don't belong, that those who don't belong are closest to the heart and mission of God. And I love that the holy restlessness that we feel as people of faith in this time comes from God's restless love and desire for us. God's delight is to give us stories. All we have to do is journey, walk together by faith, and we'll get there together in faith. May it be so. Amen.